and took something away from your parallel sessions today. The NetworkNature team have been listening in to all of those sessions and feeding back some key messages that have come out of those chats. And this really is hot off the press. They've been working really hard to condense and compile those key messages down. So we've got some housekeeping rules before we get into those. Just be aware of those 3 points. We are being recorded. Only speakers and panelists can unmute, and please use the Q&A facility to ask questions. It's really keen that we keep this interactive element going through the afternoon. So I know that sometimes towards the end of the day, the temptation can come to sit back and nod off behind your webcams, but please stay with us, stay interacting, keep sending us your thoughts and your questions, because we'd love to get you involved. Let's just head into summing up what we've been hearing in those parallel sessions. Should be getting a slide up shortly that will tell us a little bit about the session on carbon farming as a nature-based solution. There we go. I did catch the panel session in this one. It was very interesting. And one of the key things that came out was the importance of dialogue to establish common ground and understanding for these kinds of approaches, which ultimately mean sometimes quite revolutionary changes in how we manage our land. The bottom one there particularly speaks to me about professional and independent advice, building and maintaining a community of practice, and giving clear mechanisms for rewards to farmers. That piece about advice, I was listening into the panel, and one of the panelists said that a really good farm advisor, and many of the academics and researchers among you, you may well find yourself advising farmers and landowners one day, and saying that a good advisor should be almost like the relationship with a coach, like a sports coach, somebody that the farmer can look to and trust and listen to their advice in the knowledge that that is going to get them to a better place. So think of yourselves as coaches going forward. IUCN's session on the role of nature-based solutions in delivering the post-2020 biodiversity framework. Well, that middle one has got to be the one that comes out loud and clear. The contribution of nature-based solutions must be recognised and scaled up globally. And we heard this morning that there's still a barrier with that there's still a lot of ignorance out there. But hopefully using the IUCN global standard for nature-based solutions and other tools that are out there might help boost that recognition. So that sounds like a really constructive session had there. Moving on, what have we got next? Rethinking Cities. I had to ask for a little bit of help to understand some of the acronyms in this slide. And as soon as somebody said, a smart city is using technological tools and is a technological modern city, that sort of helped me engage with what we're talking about here. So smart as a means to underpin sustainable urban development of human-centered cities. And QOL was a new one on me. I had no idea what that meant until somebody kindly explained it was quality of life, and suddenly everything falls into place when you think that policymakers have increased responsibility to increase quality of life due to clear demand by European citizens to reorient economies to new principles that do allow our cities to be more resilient, more livable, and to avoid any future pandemics. Anyone that has lived in the city through COVID will know how challenging that was. And anyone that lived in a rural area will know that often it felt a lot easier to be in those wide open spaces during the lockdowns. So really interesting thoughts coming out of the Rethinking Cities parallel session. And then the one on talking about a kickoff session for national representatives for SMEs, small and medium enterprises interested in nature-based solutions. I haven't read this yet. This really is hot off the press coming from the NetworkNature team. So let's just pick one at random. Building on preliminary results of our online survey, the main problems faced by SMEs when moving towards nature-based solutions. And the key solutions were further identified and prioritized. How mysterious. I want to know what the main problems and the key solutions were. But what will happen is that you will have all of the slides, more feedback from those sessions that will be available on the NetworkNature website. So you can actually go to the website, download more information if you're keen to know more. And do we have anything from the Research Gaps parallel session at all? Yes, we do. Again, I haven't seen this one in advance. So again, I'm just kind of riffing it here. Everyone scan your eyes down that. I'm going to go straight to the bottom there. Barriers for research and innovation to support deployment of effective NBS. Lack of knowledge about the benefits of nature-based solutions. I've heard that. I think I heard that coming out in another session, in the carbon farming session as well. Siloed approaches, dominant narratives, systemic evaluation indicators, and open data. Well, the last one is I'm not an expert on that, but the lack of knowledge and those siloed approaches, I think we've seen that coming out again and again today as something that we really need to overcome if we are going to get NBS front and center stage of how we tackle the nature crisis and climate change. So you can look at those slides at your leisure and really absorb them, like I said, by going to the NetworkNature website and downloading them and just taking your time to have a look through those key messages. So without further ado, let's move on and hear from some of our afternoon speakers. To help us reflect on the day and look ahead to next opportunities, I would like to hand over to Philippe Tulken. Are you there, Philippe? He's the acting head of climate and planetary boundaries in the Research and Innovation Directorate General of the European Commission. Now, there are few people more qualified for such a job. Philippe holds a PhD in climate physics and has worked throughout his career at the interface between climate science and policies, including for the chairman of the IPCC. His department looks at the outcomes of all these different research activities on climate change, biodiversity, and NBS to then transfer knowledge and help design future EU policies in these areas. So what next for NBS and ecosystem restoration as part of a European Green Deal? To hear the answer, over to you, Philippe.
Hello, Anna. Do you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you loud and clear.
So, but you're so eloquent. I would let you continue. You speak much better than me. So why should I go for a speech? And you have done a very nice introduction as well. So I just want to start by thanking very warmly NetworkNature for such an efficient organization. And we are really satisfied with what this event has gathered. I just listened to the reports from the breakout groups. This is certainly to be looked at in detail and taken further. And you managed to gather a large number of stakeholders for this dialogue, which is important. So the first sentence of this intervention will be quite obvious to you, but it's good perhaps to also put this intervention in the broader context. We all know that our livelihoods, well-being, and chance to tackle climate change all depend on nature. Nature provides all sorts of essential services to our societies: clean air, water, food, and pollination. It sustains tourism and leisure activities. It contributes to mental and physical health and delivers many other functions. You just said, Anna, that the people who have lived through the pandemic in the cities understood very well what nature stands for and why it is so important to be at peace with nature. In many instances, nature is also the most effective insurance policy, protecting us from floods, landslides, fires, or extreme heat. The tragic natural disasters that have hit Europe and the world this summer have all been a stark reminder of how much we need this protection. However, we are facing an unprecedented crisis in biodiversity loss, posing a serious threat to our future welfare. For example, 75% of the land and most of the ocean have been transformed by human impact. 1 million species are threatened by extinction this century. These are well-known figures, but they need to be repeated on and on, not to frighten people, but so that they are aware. And COVID-19 pandemic that rages across the world is linked to wildlife, land use change, to that loss. Again and again, we need to hammer these measures because they need to be well understood in our society. It is in this particularly challenging context that nature-based solutions are increasingly recognized internationally, as a fundamental part of action for both the climate and biodiversity crisis. A UNEP report issued last May states that investments in NBS need to triple by 2030. If the world is to meet its climate change, biodiversity, and land restoration targets, otherwise it will be very difficult, and nature-based solutions are really at the heart of these solutions. Studies show that nature-based solutions, especially the protection and restoration of forests, wetlands, mangroves, and other ecosystems, are one of the most accessible and cost-effective solutions to the climate, biodiversity, and human health crisis. Research findings indicate that the conservation and effective management and guardianship of at least 30% of the planet in the most important places for biodiversity could protect up to 80% of plant and animal species and secure 60% of the planet's carbon stocks and 60% of the planet's clean water. I don't know actually if these figures will help, but it's good that we have these figures because we are trying through many ways to communicate to decision makers, to the population as well. And sometimes to some figures are more telling than others. For others, we need good stories, and NBS actually, they make very good stories. But to protect and restore the most irreplaceable areas on land and sea, we urgently need to bring together resources from governments, philanthropy, and companies. While private donors have an important role to play, this goal requires the commitment of all governments. We need increased political leadership to set the right framework conditions for fixing our unsustainable relationship with nature and putting it at the heart of the economic thinking. We need to urgently move towards nature-positive economy in Europe and globally. Such an economy would create opportunities for viable large-scale NBS across various sectors while creating a win-win for nature, climate, and the people. Again and again, you have heard these sentences about win-win and so on. You certainly have been in contact with many economists. We need to convince them further. I've been talking to many economists. I was not an expert on NBS, but I got converted thanks to the very competent colleagues that I have. And it's a fascinating discussion, tough, but the mentalities are evolving and we need to continue forcefully. This calls for changes in policies and in prices to reflect the true value of nature's benefit and the cost of its loss. We also need to change behavioral norms and remove harmful subsidies to promote more sustainable consumption and production patterns. And last but not least, non-market measures such as binding targets and restoration and other regulatory measures to deal with issues that cannot be solved through markets. By no means we think that markets are perfect, but markets can be very powerful. We all know this. We just need to use them smartly. Such changes should incentivize investment flows from both public and private sources and Europe. And Europe is leading the way with various European Green Deal policies and initiatives, including the EU Taxonomy on sustainable finance. Again, this taxonomy is a complex process, is voluntary, but it is needed. It needs to be used and promoted so that the mentality, the investments are evolving. It is also critically important that member states use the transformative potential of the recovery and resilience plans, their plans, to invest in nature for the benefit of this generation and those to come. A lot of scientific evidence already exists to inform and drive this process, including the recent Dasgupta review on the economics of biodiversity, but more work is needed to enhance our understanding of the benefits of nature and risks from its loss. In conclusion, we must listen to science here as well, not only on climate, and invest in science if we want to have successes in addressing the joint climate biodiversity crisis. This is what we do in the European Commission in DG Research Innovation with a growing portfolio of projects on NBS and biodiversity in Horizon 2020, including 4 new demonstration projects on ecosystem restoration resulting from the Green Deal call of 2020. An event will be organized on the outcome of the Green Deal call on the 27th of October. You are all invited, of course, to participate and to know what are the results from this call. We will continue this investment in Horizon Europe. The first work program of Horizon Europe for 2021 and 2022 builds on the outcomes of the current generation of Horizon 2020 projects, with many interesting new opportunities for NBS. NBS feature also prominently in the Horizon Europe Biodiversity Partnership, as well as in Horizon Europe's missions, notably the one on adaptation to climate change, where NBS is seen as a key solution for resilience building across critical sectors such as infrastructure, food, and health. I invite you to read the documents on the missions. There are 5 missions are called Green Deal missions, 1 on ocean, 1 on land, 1 on climate neutral cities, and the mission on adaptation that I referred to before. In addition, NBS for the resilience of communities to sea level rise, floods, and droughts will also be implemented in Mission Oceans. I just said it before while listing the missions. In a nutshell, we are not short of ideas. Science is clear on what needs to be done, but it is high time to become serious and more courageous about implementation across policy, business, and civil society. And the researchers have a role to play in there. All the researchers can go further in the innovation value chain to push these solutions towards their implementation. I would like to really conclude now by thanking NetworkNature for the organization of this very timely event and for its key role in supporting the growing NBS community of practitioners, business, investors, and policymakers. We do our best to help you. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Philippe. And early as well, we've actually got ahead of ourselves. That's great. And I enjoyed hearing your thoughts on the importance of being at peace with nature. The 27th of October event you mentioned on the Green Deal, could you pop an invitation or a link into the chat, Philippe, so that people can pop that in their diaries and their calendars? That would be great. Thank you very much. Moving on to our panel session. So these are always really good opportunity to get stuck into the nitty gritty. Our closing plenary panel and a chance to hear from a diverse range of voices who share the same goal, joint action on nature-based solutions. And as we did this morning, I will ask each panelist to introduce themselves with an opening statement. We will go through the panel one by one, hear their opening statements, and then we'll all come together for a chat afterwards. First up, Heise Franze is the Regional Director for Europe and Central Asia at Youth for Nature, which is an international youth-led organization aimed at mobilizing young people to really take the lead on solutions for nature and climate. Heise is a social scientist from Brazil, but now lives in Finland and has worked on many projects focused on diversity and inclusion, feminism, social impact and sustainability. Welcome, Heise. Over to you for a few minutes opening statement.
Thanks a lot for introducing me. I have a similar feeling as Philip, that you spoke so well that maybe you could do my part here. So I would like to start by thanks everyone that is here today, because it's not easy to be Zooming again. We all had a really rough year of staring at screens, so I think it's completely great that you are here today, and this is exactly the type of energy we do to lead the change that is needed. So really, I appreciate that you are all here at the end of the day, still following us. So today I would like to focus a little bit. As you see, my background is a lot on the social sciences, on the diversity and inclusion side of things. And many of you may ask what this have to do with nature-based solutions. And it has to do, it's completely linked, because when human societies, they are connected so it's the environment. So we want to develop healthy systems in both dimensions. And today what I really expect to bring to you is the possibility of imagining and of imagination, and the possibility of doing things through communication. So this is also something that Philip just mentioned, on how much of their work and his work ranges around communicating to a diverse range of stakeholders and trying to convince them on nature-based solutions. And I think this is definitely something we need to achieve the targets of this decade. So yeah, that's it for my opening statement. And I will also invite you to follow our work at Use for Nature, and I will link our website on the comments.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Haja. And yeah, do pop the link in there. And thank you very much for Philippe for putting yours there too. Moving on now, Richard Scott joins us from SER Europe, a branch of the Society for Ecological Restoration, where he is also a board member. Their aim is to bring together scientists and ecological restoration practitioners from different backgrounds and to get them to swap and share knowledge and expertise. Richard is also director at the National Wildflower Centre at the Eden Project in Cornwall in the UK. I've been there, amazing place, though he's actually based in Liverpool. And are you speaking from Liverpool today, Richard?
I'm speaking from Liverpool, yeah.
Fantastic. I also love Liverpool a lot. Very cool city. And he chairs the UK Urban Ecology Forum. Over to you, Richard, for an opening 3 minutes.
Well, I think we're in a really exciting time, and there's the whole ecological message to get across to the world. And I think a lot of us have been probably depressed in the past by so many, like targets that haven't been met over the years. I remember Sebastian Winkler actually asked me to go to Barcelona in 2010, and it's sad when those targets and disappointments don't get met. So we really have to grasp the ticket now, and this point in time, I think the way people reacted, there could be a resurgence of the public parks movement in terms of what public parks meant for people, and merge that with a whole new meaning for ecology. But the fact is 70% of the world could be living in cities by 2050. That's possible. And we must respond to the remainder of the world in terms of the best spaces, and the opportunity to bring these things together, not separate them. The urban and rural divides must be broken down. And I think the exciting thing from SER Europe is the expertise that rests in addressing the knowledge, but also the practitioners and the excitement and imagery of projects that have really worked, sometimes in astonishing places. And that's certainly been my experience. And it's the link to people, the people-nature link, I think has so much been missed. It's the cultural link. I was in a wonderful meeting only last week in Paris. It was incredible, they made it happen, with parks reps from all over France. And the real message there was imagination. We have to respond creatively to the situation with science, with culture, with art. Wonderful cities like Nantes in France have led a cultural revolution there in terms of what they've done in their cities. And I think the conservation movement needs to learn from that, and scientists need to pass on that joy of their life experience of nature in more direct ways. And we talk about smart cities. I think it's also about being smart and pleasant in the way we communicate our message to people, not being isolated, but really tackling this green agenda in an imaginative way that means people feel they are part of a movement. We've got the climate emergency and extinction crisis, quite separate things, but ecological restoration is a wonderful way to make it visible to people. And we need to make places feel closer together. Patrick Geddes, who was a visionary planner from 1870, Darwin's time, it was he who invented the expression "think global, act local" in 1870 rather than 1970. So I think we would just like to share that our eagerness as an organisation, the Society for Ecological Restoration Europe, to really be part of a message, sending a message and sharing knowledge and not reinventing the wheel. There's so much to do and so little time to do it. We can't afford that. So SDG 17 is partnerships, and it's probably the most important of them all, alongside sustainable cities and communities. We must share these things to people, share science, share culture, share artistic ways of getting these messages across. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. That absolutely inspirational. I was almost fist pumping the air listening to you there. It was a really rallying call for the afternoon. And mentioning Darwin, actually, I'm in Shropshire, and a 5-minute walk outside my front door is the birthplace of Charles Darwin. So here we are talking about nature and protecting ecology, and that it's just struck me, the irony of that. Next up, welcome Jürgen Tack. Is Scientific Director at the European Landowners Organization, which works to promote a sustainable and prosperous countryside while increasing awareness of environmental and agricultural issues. Jürgen is well placed to work across both of these areas. He studied marine ecology at university in Brussels, built his agricultural credentials while developing a number of oyster farms along the Kenyan coastline in East Africa, and later became CEO of the Research Institute for Nature and Forest in Belgium. He also sat on the European Commission's expert working group on nature-based solutions. So absolutely fascinating to bring someone that is so closely working across the conservation world, the nature world, and also farming and agriculture. Really valuable. Welcome, Jürgen. Over to you for your opening statement.
Okay, thank you very much, Anna. I have to say, when thinking about my opening statement, I immediately had a problem with the title of this afternoon's session: How to Achieve Ecosystem Restoration Targets Through Joint Actions for Nature-Based Solutions. This puts nature-based solutions in the central place, while nature-based solutions should be a methodology to reach and achieve ecosystem restoration targets. And it's not the restoration targets who would be a reason to do nature-based solutions. But I would like to refer to a discussion you had this morning during the plenary session, in which the question was asked, should we step back or should we step in when speaking about restoration targets? And I think that's a very, very important question. And together with that question, we have to ask ourselves, where do we want to put our focus on? Do we want to restore habitats, or do we want to restore ecosystem services? And that is sometimes the same, but it's not always the same. We see that quite often the main objective for many nature conservation organizations is restoring habitats. Knowing that we have climate change, we know that let's say the functioning of certain habitats in places where they were 100 or 200 years ago are not the same anymore. We do not have the same species anymore in those habitats. Species we were moving up to the poles, leaving their original habitat behind and searching for new opportunities in new habitats. But also the climatic change makes that certain habitats are changing. And so we have to think, is the restoration of those habitats our main goal? Or do we want to restore the ecosystem services we need from nature? Because in the end, it's not nature which is going to disappear. It's going to be the humans who are going to disappear. Thank you.
That was fascinating. I was really settling down then to listen to you talk for a lot. I even lost sight of the clock, which is my job. Thank you very much, Jürgen. That was very interesting. Raul Sanchez joins us. Hello, Raul. He is coordinator at Urban Greenup, an EU-funded project which aims to mitigate the effects of climate change, improve air quality and water management in our cities through innovative nature-based solutions. Raul is an urban greening specialist and is using his practical expertise to renature urban plans through the use of things like green roofs, smart soils, urban farms and vertical greening. Over to you, Raul. Tell us more about that in your opening statement.
Thank you very much, Anna, for your kind introduction, and thank you. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you very much for everybody for taking some time to hear me. Well, I think that everybody knows that among city challenges, environmental challenges, and how all these challenges are transforming our cities into complex spaces or tricky places to live. In the end, through a clear deterioration of our ecosystem services, not our ecosystems. In this sense, I think that in an urban context, we can identify several urban challenges, such as climate risk and climate impact, water quality and management, air quality, biodiversity loss, of course, also soil management, the efficiency of resources, how we can use in a sustainable way our energy. So, very important, the uncontrolled urbanization, of course, public health and well-being, and finally the environmental justice and cohesion. So I think that taking into account the context mentioned previously, we can categorize the ecosystem services mainly in four categories: provision and services. I think that everybody knows this, but just to remind, regulating services, habitat services, cultural and amenity services. We can include here the ecological functions underlying the production of ecosystem services. And that this is the first and essential point to act on the services, ecosystem and ecosystem services in our cities, because it's simply to understand that we need to think in our cities as ecosystems. Cities are ecosystems. So these urban challenges affect directly on the ecosystem services provision. The cities need to supply as we to ensure the livability in urban areas, but obviously we can restore ecosystem and the ecosystem services using a natural or non-sustainable solution. This is the point to include nature-based solutions. We have the nature-based solutions to do this, and now at this stage we have the knowledge. The knowledge on the nature-based solutions and the right use of nature-based solutions. Nature-based solutions provide us with an integral alternatives to restore ecosystems, and joint action respond to the specific question of this opening statement. And the joint action for nature-based solutions offer or deliver integral solutions for direct and indirect impact. Positive. I think that is better to think in positive impact on it. So I think that the simplest, I always think that the simplest MBA is a tree. So you can imagine the multiple and positive benefits of an urban forest, for instance. I'm talking about carbon sequestration, temperature buffering, shade, flood control, air filtration, water infiltration, soil management, etc. And social, of course, habitat promotion and biodiversity conservation, and social services as well. I'm talking about social cohesion, physical activity promotion, well-being improvement, etc. As I mentioned before, currently we have the knowledge of nature-based solutions, and we just need to implement them, involving as many stakeholders as we will be able, in order to achieve a comprehensive restoration of ecosystem services through joint action for nature-based solutions. Just to finish, the collaboration among public authorities, citizens, nature-based solutions providers, and research and academia should be part of this of the joint action for nature-based solutions. especially important is the public-private collaboration on collaboration, because it will be ensure the right technical, social, and economic MBS implement. The joint action for nature-based solutions will allow us to establish the categorization of nature-based solutions to restore ecosystem services, taking into account a simple sequence: urban challenges identification, ecosystem services affected, nature-based solutions definition, design and definition for ecosystem services, and finally, ecosystem restoration. Yes, thank you very much.
Sorry, a gentle nudge there.
Yeah. Okay.
Excellent. Thank you, Raoul. Thank you. There's that word again, implementation. It keeps coming up all day, and it sort of echoes what Daisy was saying this morning about, you know, we've done the knowledge and the pilots. We now need to scale this up and implement it at scale. Thank you very much, Raoul. Last but by no means least, Silvana Di Sabatino, welcome. She is a professor of physics at the University of Bologna in Italy. She coordinates the amazing Operandum project, which has open air laboratories all over the world, testing how nature-based solutions can help manage and mitigate environmental risks, from tackling flooding in Ireland to reducing runoff in Australia by preventing sediment from gullies and grazing lands washing into the Great Barrier Reef. It is an extraordinarily diverse project. I was having a look at your website. It's quite fascinating. Over to you, Silvana.
Thank you, Anna. Really thank you for the introduction. So now it will be difficult to do better than you. But anyway, I'm really enjoying the session, and really good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for inviting me. And I'm so happy to share with you a few lines about the project that I coordinate. I have the honor to coordinate. It started already 3 years ago. And it will last for another year. And as you said, it's good that I'm at the end, because I wanted to add one element in what has been said so far. MBS, we have learned that is a new concept. We have learned in the last years that is permeating every area of society, but also of science and knowledge. As an academic, I'm learning that although I'm a physicist, I really need to collaborate and to work with other disciplines if we want to do something useful for the environment, and also for biodiversity, and so to also preserve our territories against climate change. So the element that I would like to add is, we have talked about the urban context. I don't know, maybe some of you remember that maybe 10 years ago, we were talking about green infrastructures. I come from the urban environment, so it's an element where I also started looking at the trees in street canyons. So when I started, let's say 20 years ago, my question as a scientist was, how can we put vegetation in street canyons, so those narrow roads that we have in our cities, still make better environment, but at the same time not consider them as element, as obstacles, so to increase air concentration. So let's say that as a scientist, we started to address also the problem of how you can add green infrastructure or MBS in our cities, but at the same time make them functional. So coming from that and that vision, so now the challenge is that your cities are connected with rural environments, with the coastland, with the mountains. And so there is a continuous link. So when you work on flooding then, so you and work on very much larger areas, typically than the urban, okay, depends on the cities, but typically the cities in Italy are small, if the majority small centers. So let's say that the challenge we have working in rural context is that the size is completely different. So the investment that is needed is on a larger scale. But I would like to give you, so the element that...
Just a gentle nudge, Silvana.
Sorry?
On just a gentle nudge on time.
Yeah. Just one thing is that when you talk about hydrometeorological risks reduction, the extra connotation that you need to add to your NBS is effectiveness. So the role of the scientist is to really go through kind of scientific and engineering approach to prove that that solution is able to mitigate your flooding, is able to mitigate your landslide. So for MBS in a non-rural context, for hydrometeorological risk reduction, this is a key element.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, all of you. They were we really have got such diversity of thoughts and experience here. So I'm sure that will inform a really interesting panel discussion session. Heise, I would like to bring you back in here and really just frame your question in the context of the UN Decade on Restoration. And it has been promised that the voices and perspectives of youth will be included in the design and implementation at all levels. In your experience, what's the most effective way for young people to influence decision-making when it comes to nature-based solutions? And are you satisfied that the highest levels really are listening?
Thank you for your question. If I'm allowed, I'm gonna talk about more than one way. And I'm gonna do here some sort of double answer. So first, for decision makers and everyone working with project planning, design, project implementation, I would advise you on how to include youth. Is that one very effective way is to analyze your own preconceptions and to analyze what are your thoughts about youth. And for example, you don't see many young people in leadership positions in companies, organizations, or leading on projects. And it happens that there are some conceptions that youth doesn't have enough experience, or youth doesn't have enough knowledge. So one way of breaking with this is, for example, by putting a young person to lead on your entire project, or by putting young people to lead on older people as well. So this is one way of doing that. And I have an experience from a friend who is working in a project in Nepal, and they chose the youngest person to lead on the nature-based project. And I thought that this was a very interesting way of twisting these preconceptions. Of course, we need to understand that we bring different experiences to the table, we bring diversity, and of course, we will not have the same amount of experience as a senior person with 20 years of experience, but we also bring other things that are important for inclusion. I would also advise high-level organizations to stay with the trouble. And by this, I mean to recognize that many times youth will bring conflicting views of nature and conflicting views on how things are gonna be done or they need to be done. And this is very helpful, and this should not be shut away, and it should not be silenced, but rather integrated in your project. And why I'm saying this is because I'm currently writing my thesis about different discourses of nature in nature-based solutions. And what happens usually when someone brings a different view is that this person needs to be educated on the mainstream version of nature-based solutions. And we cannot have nature-based solutions as a rebranding of all the bad history of conservation, because conservation also expelled indigenous communities, conservation also removed communities from their lands, and also contributed to gentrification in many cities. So we need to acknowledge this, and we need to stay with the trouble, basically. So own it and understand how we can deal with these contradictions as well. And now, talking to my youth fellows that are probably following us today, I would say that the best way of getting engaged is to try to understand what is your personal history and what are your personal strengths. So basically, you don't need to be the hero climate activist or the nature activist. You can influence your own little community, and you can have a very diverse background yourself. And why am I saying this? Because I'm not the classic climate and environmental activist, or I'm not the classic person in the environmental movement, but I found ways of influencing my own university, or I found ways of influencing through my own master's thesis, or through my own very little bubble, and that's totally okay. So if your thing is urban gardening, go for it. If your thing is doing advocacy at your university level, go for it. If your thing is influencing at COP26, you can go for it. But I would just advise you to just follow your heart and your passions, and you will get there for sure. So this is basically the answers to your question. I hope it was not too long and hectic.
It was absolutely perfect. It wasn't too long, and I like hectic. I thought that was absolutely fantastic. Thank you very much, Gijs. When you were talking about sort of putting young people in leadership roles and making sure that we give prominence to young voices, one person that I think that will really chime with is Jürgen Tack, because in agriculture, that's one of the biggest issues we're talking about is, you know, an aging workforce. I mean, in the UK, I think the average age of a farmer is about 59. And, you know, the industry is talking all the time about empowering youth in agriculture, bringing young voices forward in agriculture. Yet one of the things that was quite telling when we did an audience interaction session this morning, Jürgen, there are no landowners in our audience today. What did that say to you about voices and voices that are being heard and coming forward?
Well, I have to say, Anna, thank you very much for this question, because it was right number one on my list to come back indeed to your remark you gave at the end of this morning's plenary session, that you were disappointed not to have private landowners among the audience. The question is, was that the case? I do think that you had private landowners among your audience. However, if you are posing the question, let's say if you have a biologist in your audience and you give him the question, are you a nature conservationist? Are you a consultant? Are you a farmer? Are you a policymaker? Or are you a house owner? He's probably going to say that he is maybe a nature NGO, a nature conservationist, that he is maybe a consultant, but there is almost no risk that he is going to answer that he is a house owner. I would say that's the same with the private landowner. They are foresters, they are farmers, they are nature conservationists, much more than they are landowners. And so I think that's an important issue. We have to make sure that we are speaking the right language when we are trying to include private landowners.
What are your thoughts on youth in agriculture? Just picking up on some of the things that Gijs touched on there.
Yeah, well, let's say we have seen also during this afternoon session on carbon farming that, let's say, first of all, in agriculture, people are quite conservative. But at the same time, the demands towards farmers are more and more complicated, are more and more asking for innovative instruments and so on. So that makes that it's extremely difficult for them to follow up all of the social needs, of the social questions that are asked today. At the same time, that is a challenge for the young people who are taking over, and especially with landowners. Let's say they are trying to take care of their land because that is their capital they want to give to the next generation. And so it will indeed be a challenge to make sure that that next generation is tackling things in another way. But if I look at our membership, then we see that let's say the generations coming up do have a true and a genuine interest to do things in a different way. What is very important, that is a private landowner is an entrepreneur in the countryside. And so there has to be a business model. And I think that with nature-based solutions and with ecosystem services, that there is a valid business model, but we are already speaking for 10, 15 years on the payment for ecosystem services. And I do think we really have to do something with that, not only talk about it, but really implement it. And it's strange enough now for the first time that we see within the Common Agriculture Policy, that we see for the first time a payment for ecosystem services coming up with carbon farming, where we are really developing certification and an international market for those certificates. So, but we should not only do that on carbon farming, we should do that on the totality of ecosystem services.
Thank you, Jürgen. And yeah, I want to come back and talk about how we inspire farmers to get on board with that more shortly. And thank you for your comments on youth. Heise, everything that you were saying there really chimed with me. You know, we have a lot of young farmers who have so many ideas and they are itching to employ them, but very often the person holding the checkbook is a lot older, and sometimes you literally have to wait for them to not be around anymore before you can make those changes. So I think youth and next generation is a really key theme across everything that you guys do. I wanted to pick up on something that Jürgen said about, are we protecting habitats or ecosystem services? Because I wanted to bring in Richard Scott on that. When you heard Jürgen sort of ask that question, Richard, how were you answering that in your mind? What's your position on that?
I've got a very good friend actually, who's he's kind of the architect of the British National Vegetation Classification, and he says, you know, beware of like the tyranny of typologies. And I think sometimes we need to blur things a little bit to get bigger messages. And I'm in mind too of, for example, there's a national park for city movement in London. And they've succeeded in linking all the green spaces in London as a national park. Now, at the time when they were first mooting that, people were saying, don't be ridiculous, it's not a real national park. And they said, we don't, you know, we don't care about that. We need the bigger picture and we need to excite people. So I think there needs to be flexibility in the system in terms of the language we talk about, but there is the importance of solid science in habitats and in, you know, ecosystems that are very, very important. So that shouldn't be dismissed. But I think the language to the world must be about quality and, you know, why was it that, you know, at a particular point in time, we were willing to dedicate, you know, parks in the very heart of our cities and spend great trouble to do it. And so we need to recalibrate our thinking a little bit, but there's some wonderful scientific knowledge and artistic knowledge and cultural knowledge that hopefully can help us.
I think you're right about picking up on language, because you, I suppose maybe what Jürgen was getting at, and correct me if I've interpreted this wrong, but if, say you were to talk about reintroducing beavers, you could look at that through a lens of ecosystem service, as in natural flood management, slowing the flow, and or you could look at it through a frame of rewilding and bringing back a landscape that is prehistoric and predates human action on that land. And there are people with opinions on both. I would say one tends to get people riled up more than the other. Sort of rewilding, people have very strong opinions on that, yet nature-based solutions and slowing the flow and doesn't seem to get people quite so divided. What do you think about that, Richard? Just picking up on what you were saying about language. When you frame it as one thing, people get angry, frame it as something else, and they're all like, oh, that's
I think
right.
it is obviously there's energies attached to different things, and, you know, wildings come, you know, quite quickly into the conservation language. But it's always been there in different forms. You know, like there was Professor Suckhoff in Berlin who talked about the gaps between the Berlin Wall and the railway lines that had been left. And people have always observed those things. And it's sort of, but it sets a new train of thought and a new form of discussion. The important thing is we don't fall out and stop things happening. There's a danger of saying no, whereas we really should be negotiating our common points, I think, really, if that makes sense. But there's some wonderful knowledge. I mean, that's the thing. There's so much knowledge in terms of scientists and ecological restoration, but often it's not shared in a way that really brings on board a bigger audience. And that's what we want to do.
Thank you, Richard. I'm going to go to Raoul now. By the way, if anyone's at home and you've got a burning question, send it in, get it in the chat, and we'll ask your question. Raoul, you made the point. Cities are ecosystems, and I can tell that that's a passion that you want to get across, and a belief. And you're right. People, I have never thought in the past of cities as ecosystems, and we have to try and change that mindset. And the Urban Green Up project is getting results, isn't it? And I was amazed to read average summer temperatures in the city of Izmir in Turkey reduced by 3 to 5 degrees by planting 5,000 trees. And you can sum it up in a sentence and it makes it sound so easy. Oh, that's simple, just plant trees and it will bring the temperature down. Brilliant. But I know it isn't that easy. Can you just tell us, how did you make such a success there? And is there a surefire way of replicating that success elsewhere?
Yeah, I think I think that this is the first or the most important thing, that to understand that this is not easy to achieve. I think that the first we need to change our mind. I think that we need to think that it's possible. And as I mentioned in my previous speech, I think that the more the simplest nature-based solution, or the simplest way to renaturalize our cities is planting trees. Okay, it makes easy, but it's not easy. I think that nature-based solutions can contribute to this change. I think that is complex, and we need to work and work and work. All our colleagues have mentioned that we have knowledge, we have now the proper audience. We have the youth in our side to work. I think that it's a good opportunity to generate green jobs. Complicated. Okay, just our project, the Urban Green Up project, is just one example or one point to contribute. We want to contribute to this, including a new concept, the renaturing urban plan, to make easier to our cities the implementation of nature-based solutions, because we try to include this renaturing urban plan in the new urban planning. I think that this is the way to include that. I don't like to say it should be compulsory, but I think that we need to facilitate to our cities to include nature-based solutions in this plan. So if we generate a regulatory framework in relation to nature-based solutions, if we promote, if we incentivize economical or non-economical, in an economical or non-economical way, if we aware people about the benefits of nature-based solutions, I think this is the idea, because cities are ecosystems. We are animals. We are living things living in ecosystems, an ecosystem, natural ecosystems, urban ecosystems. So we need to feel part of this ecosystem. So if we are able to involve all the stakeholders, all the animals, sorry for this example, that live in this in urban ecosystems, I think that it would be easy in a near future to understand the benefits of nature-based solutions, and we are providing cities the possibility to make easier the implementation of nature-based solutions. You are muted, Anna, sorry.
That's the first time I did that today. I was hoping I could get through a full conference without doing it, damn it. I could see Silvana nodding enthusiastically as you were talking there, Raoul. And as a physicist, you are used to dealing with complicated. you can do complicated.
I don't know.
But I suppose the challenge is when we communicate those complex messages. Can you share a success story from one of your living labs and kind of demonstrate how we can communicate the complex in a way that can reach broad audiences?
Anna, this is a difficult question, but anyway, we'll try. And as Richard is reminding us, we need to set high standards. Okay, so the challenge is always very, very important. Anyway, talking about examples, so you talked about living labs, but I was saying earlier that we have, in a way, extended this concept in calling living labs open air laboratory. So it has been, let's say, a rethinking of the concept. Living labs were thought and originated for urban environment. So giving the larger space and the variety of the context, we work from the coastal areas to the mountains. We have this laboratory, which means that our implementation are done in open air, and the relationship with the stakeholders is key. One example we have is in the Lake Puruvesi. This is the one I wanted to mention because looking and also on what could be beneficial. So in that lake, we have the problem of preserving the biodiversity and preserving the purity of water. This lake is already part of a Natura network, so it's already been investigated and so on. So what do we do there? So there are forests around it, so there are, of course, landowners. And the problem is that climate change, excessive water, make so maximize eutrophication, and so then it's put the biodiversity at risk. So what they do, they start from a good management, the forestry, continuous cover forestry management, also setting up other natural-based solutions like riparian zones or buffer zones, ponds, and this has to be done in including the whole chain of stakeholders, so from the landowners, but also those bodies that manage the lake, manage, of course, the forest. And it is very important key in the success that some of those MBS implemented there have been done by the people, by the citizens. As you have seen in Finland, also there is this cultural difference. We didn't speak about this. If we are in northern countries, let's say that doing implementation and working with nature may be easier than in southern Europe. So this is something that we have investigated through our OALs. So let's say that in Finland, our OAL is an example of mature living lab, and it is used as an example for the new one. So that's basically some of the elements, and I repeat, message is the key message is to involve the citizens to be part of the transformation and the implementation through the entire chain of the stakeholders.
Involving citizens and stakeholders sort of leads seamlessly into the question next that I'm going to throw back to Jürgen. Just talking about how we really inspire the majority of landowners, farmers, foresters, however they may identify, to embrace nature-based approaches to land management. And I'm not just talking here about financial incentives. I'm not talking about subsidies necessarily. I'm talking about that kind of almost an attitude, an inspiration to make them want to do it as well. Because I'm a member of the farming community myself, and there has been distrust over the years of meddling from outsiders, people who don't know the land as well as the people that farm it, that forest it, that own it, and have done for generations. And that has created a barrier. What will it take to change the spirit, the mindset around all of this?
Well, the question is probably easier than the answer. But
I definitely have the easy job, by the way. I recognize that.
Well, let's say the distrust we see today between, let's say, more in general, people living in the countryside. It's not only landowners, people living in the countryside towards people living in the cities. We see that people in the cities with no or less nature available have increasing demands towards nature-based solutions, towards nature they would like to have. We have seen that very clearly throughout the COVID period. People are coming out of the cities towards the countryside. They want to walk in nature, in the forest, in the agricultural fields. And on the other side, we have people who have been dealing with the countryside already for many generations. And now all of a sudden they are confronted with quite a number of demands. And at the same time asking that they change their approach towards the land they have owned for generations. And that's for a very large part the reason of the distrust. They all of a sudden see people who have, for them, no clue how the countryside is working, now telling them that, well, maybe it's better not to hunt anymore. Maybe you should change your agricultural practices. Yeah, forestry, can you still cut a tree? So all of those things are making it more and more difficult because you have, let's say, a confrontation between the views of those not living in the countryside towards the way people are acting in the countryside.
What do we do about it, Jürgen? Because Richard Scott said earlier about breaking down the urban-rural divide. It's time to break that down. What can be done?
I think a lot is about communication. Not only communication between those two populations, not only between the countryside and the city, it's also about a correct communication about our scientific knowledge. Because scientific knowledge is adding to the discussion in a way that we can do it in a factual way. And that is important to make sure that we are taking out, let's say, the emotion out of the discussion. Because there is a lot of emotion involved. And there exactly research and science can assist us with delivering the facts on what we see in the field.
Absolutely. Richard, could I get you to respond to that, please?
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting question, particularly from somebody speaking in England, because we've obviously had an experience with the EU, which I think had a lot to do with the disconnect between people and how the money was spent. And I live in Liverpool, which is European capital of culture, which actually saw real benefits with connecting with Europe. But I think the real point is it's how you relate and direct people. And I think I'm more experienced as an urban ecologist. So a lot of the project work I've been involved in delivering is more naturally involved people, particularly in, for example, public sowings of seeds on restoration projects. And that does not happen as much in the countryside. And I do think there's a real message from the kind of urban ecology, urban restoration world to the broader world, which is about communities. And SDG 11 is about sustainable cities and communities, and it means rural communities too. And I think, for example, in England, there was so much set aside money and kind of things like that. And I remember arguing with a DEFRA representative and saying, you know, because we've had big success with wildflower projects and in urban areas to really, really big public acclaim. But that hasn't happened so much in rural communities. And I remember arguing and saying, well, why, rather than just sowing all the edges of the fields, couldn't you add some of those edges up and deliver them next to village communities so they see a big impact right next to where they live? And it's kind of, a lot of money's often been spent without that weave with people. And in cities that happens more naturally because people are curious and say, what are you doing? If it's happening in the middle of Wales or some European expanse, which is harder to consult with people because they're not looking over not looking over your shoulder, And I think there's a real lesson, but particularly in the delivery, we've had amazing, it's like, I would say it's almost like a new parable of the sower. You know, you involve people in actually the sowing and the delivery, rather than it being done by big contractors and conservation organizations, or they should learn that kind of knowledge as part of their practice.
Yeah.
It becomes much more personal.
It's very insightful, isn't it? Because through today's sessions, urban has almost been sort of cast as the underdog, as in not being recognized as an ecosystem, and that certain things are easier in rural areas than it might be to pull off in urban areas. But, you know, as someone that spends my life in rural areas and urban areas, I know straight away where I could go to dig up a butternut squash or a cucumber from the ground in an urban area. I know straight where to go to get that urban farmed produce. I wouldn't be able to find that in a rural area. You know, I might be able to pick a sheep out of a field or a cow, but that access to getting your hands into the dirt and growing as a community is very much easier to access, I would argue, in an urban area.
It is,
so,
yeah.
you know, that's something that rural communities potentially, as you've just laid out, Richard, could be on the back foot with. I want to bring in Heise on this urban-rural divide idea that we've been exploring with Jürgen and Richard, because very much the activism that we see around climate, around nature crisis, has been rooted in our cities. You know, and I think about the big Extinction Rebellion marches and so on, that those have been the urban youth rising up. And I'm sure people do travel from the countryside to take part in those events. But what are your thoughts on bringing together these two worlds in a way that is positive and overcoming traditional divisions? Heise.
Thanks for this question. I think this is a very hard one for me because I'm a very, very urban person. And I was born in a city in Brazil that has 2 million people, and it's not one of the big ones. And I lived my entire life in a very tiny apartment. So I'm completely used to gray infrastructure and traffic jams and all of these things. So for me, it's very difficult to try to imagine how it's life as a young person in a rural area. But something that I can definitely say is that we need to have some self-criticism as urban people, and to understand that our urban demands may not be the same and may not be suitable for the rural countryside. So with this, I can say that, for example, I think the animal rights, they are essentially very urban movement, and it's a movement that I am part of it myself. But I also think that it should not be something that should just be transferred. And it's many times anchored on this type of logics of consumption and logics of processed food and logics of getting a fake meat on my plate and things like that. And this doesn't necessarily resonate with the countryside, and it doesn't even resonate maybe with solutions that we need as communities in these cities as well. So I would say that first, that myself as an urban person connected to urban movements, I think we have quite the tendency of imposing our ways and of imposing our visions to the countryside, and of seeing as completely separate things. And then I would also say that for me, I see big cultural differences in Finland and Brazil, because I would say, when you were mentioning about that in rural communities, you would find it more difficult to understand where you could put your hands on the dirt, and where you could put, where you can take your zucchinis or whatever, where you could garden. And I think for me, this is quite much the opposite as a Brazilian. I would say that whenever I would be in the countryside, I would find every house is public, and every farm is kind of public and open for everyone. And every time I would visit my relatives in the countryside, I would come with boxes and boxes of vegetables. And of course, it helps that the growing season in Brazil is pretty much the entire year. But at least I always felt that it was a little bit more the opposite, that finding communities of practice was way more difficult in the cities in Brazil than the Brazilian countryside. I would think that these networks of solidarity and that are very important for nature-based solutions are more present there.
Isa, that's fascinating. Jürgen, what were you thinking when you heard those comments there? Really enlightening, I thought.
Well, we were all sitting together this afternoon and today, trying to find solutions for a biodiversity crisis. And in the word biodiversity, we have diversity. And I think we will only solve this crisis with a diversity of solutions. It's not a single solution we need. It's multiple solutions we need, all working towards the same goal. And I think that could be the success of nature-based solutions, because we're not looking at one solution, but at many solutions towards the same goal. So I would say, let's create biodiversity with the diversity of methodologies.
And I would love to go around each of you now and ask a simple question. And I really do beg you to kind of put this in package this for me in a sentence each, right? Because there are challenges and there are opportunities. And I wonder if I could ask each of you from your own experience. So absolutely something from the heart that you have experienced in your own work. What has been the thing you have found most difficult in this area? But what is the thing that you find most, that really gets you excited, that makes you feel hopeful, that makes you feel excited about working in this area? So I want to hear something you've struggled with, but also something that makes you get out of bed in the morning and feel full of hope. So Raoul, you just popped up on my screen, so I'm going to go to you first.
Yeah, regarding the nature-based solutions, of course, and into my work area, I think that first of all, the main barrier of difficulty has been people, understanding people. The difficulty for the people to understand that nature is needed. I think that this is important. People assume that air quality, water quality, soil, well-being is included in our everyday life, but we people don't understand that these ecosystem services work well if we are able to renaturalize. If we are able to renaturalize our cities or our areas. And the second, taking into account the urban context, the second barrier for me was the administration, the complex of administration requirements, tendering processes, even although administrative procedures or processes are more complex than the funding of nature-based solutions, because the time to implement nature-based solutions, suffer a very delayed due to the administration procedures. Yeah.
So people and slow administration processes.
Yeah. Not people.
People are the problem.
People. The problem are the people.
What makes you excited? What makes you think we're going to get there?
Yeah.
People, probably.
Yeah, probably. Yeah.
Fantastic. Raoul, thank you very much. Silvana, the same question to you. What have you struggled with? What have you found difficult, but also what brings you hope and joy in the context of nature-based solutions? On mute.
The major challenge is to work in an interdisciplinary context. And I learned very fast that if I wanted to really push certain ideas or scientific ideas, I needed to collaborate also with my colleagues from social science. I'm talking only from academics. So you can imagine then to demonstrate to the people and use communication skills that I do not have. I feel comfortable if I I am in a classroom with my students talking my language, but when you grow up and now you do this important project, so then you really need to make your hand dirty, and then you have to go out of your comfort zone. So it has been difficult at the beginning. I thought we will never speak together. And now I'm the most fondest of my colleagues that come from social science, and I can learn from them. And I'm more open to really hear what they say. And maybe still do the same process of conceptualizing to translate into a formula or through a schema, but it's really been rewarding. So thank you to you, all of you guys.
Silvana, thank you so much. And mentioning social scientists, we've got to go over to Heiser. Heiser, what have you found really tough, but what have you found full of hope for the future?
I must say that since my first internship, I just worked with people from different areas. And on the first one, I just had a team of engineers. So I was the only social scientist. And I can also tell you that it was super challenging, but I also love the drill. So I think that I'm not able ever again to work only with other social scientists. I think it would be unbearable, to be completely honest. So I think there are some many barriers for me to the implementation of nature-based solutions, but I would say that one classic one that I think many of you overheard this over and over again, it's the projectization of funding. So I would say that nature-based solutions, they have long-term impact, and many times they need long-term investment. And sometimes they are just financed for this project and then it's over. And we need constant monitoring, we need constant evaluation, we need constant inputs. So many times I think it harms a little bit that it becomes a project, and also it harms the creativity that we need to engage with nature-based solutions. And I would say that what I liked the most about doing this job and doing this work, it's quite a philosophical one, but I think it makes us rethink who we are as humans, and it makes us rethink our relationship with nature, our role in this universe. So I think it's quite existential in a way, but it's something that makes me wonder not only of seeing nature as passive, but nature as shaping everything that we are, who we are, being agents, having agency. So seeing a species changing everything for us. And I think that's basically my biggest joy of working with nature-based solutions.
Heiser, thank you very much. So just going to have to try and keep it a little bit tighter if we can, gentlemen, as you wrap us up here. Top left-hand corner of my screen, Richard Scott. Richard, in your experiences, what's been tough? What's been great?
I think what's been tough very quickly is trying to change policy and through consultations. And so sometimes we spent a lot of time, writing things down and sending them off, and it's never got through the system. And I think it's been quite imaginative, but it didn't work. So the joyous thing, and it's great to hear the word joy used, has been, I think, when it's seeing it happen. It's the transformation and witness of transformation. And I would say always the obvious, always the great surprise. And it's the eye contact with people, directly connecting with the delivery, places like the Eden Project where people witness change and see it and believe it. There's a great actually Celtic word of wisdom, which I think is Taliesin from the 6th century or something, which says, you need an eye for 3 primary essentials of genius: an eye that can see nature, a heart that can feel it, and a boldness that dares follow it. And you need that kind of boldness, I think, to Liverpool reference. John Lennon said, push barriers and plant seed. So we need to push the barriers and show what's possible. But if you sow seed and you do it in convivial circumstances with a group of people, and then it's the same town or country, I'm sure, it's the surprise, it's different. People catch on to that sense of it's something different, and that's when it becomes exciting, I think. And that's what I've seen. And the groups that people have said are hard to reach or difficult to reach, if you smile at them and show them something that's worthwhile and fun to join in with, and they witness a change, it works.
Yeah, that absolutely. And I recognize that final statement very clearly. Jürgen, over to you.
Well, I'm a scientist, and I have to say that I'm an ecologist, and I'm always looking towards physics and chemistry, exact sciences with laws. In chemistry, you can do 3 times exactly the same thing, and you get the same result. In ecology, that never happens. You do 3 times the same thing, and you have 3 times a different result. And that makes that based on the same data, different groups of people see different conclusions. But at the same time, when I'm able to talk to people with very different views, and in the evening, I have brought them together, sharing a common idea on how to tackle a problem, that's also the best day I can get. Yeah,
what a buzz to bring those together. Do you think you could bring engineers and social scientists together?
I'm absolutely sure we can do that. I'm not sure what the result is going to be.
Fantastic. Thank you all for what has been the last hour. For me has absolutely flown by. I hope it has for you too, and for you at home. Thank you everybody for listening. There's an awful lot to take away and think about. Thank you Heise, Richard, Jürgen, Raoul and Silvana for bringing what you've learned out there in the real world into this discussion over Zoom. For me personally, it's been so refreshing and inspiring to hear some of the practical details and some of the anecdotes that have been brought today. For me, I don't really learn through statistics and scientific data. Unlike most of the audience here, for me, I learn through stories and anecdotes and listening to people share their passion and talk. And for me, that has been the most rewarding thing today. And of helping me understand how we can use nature-based solutions to tackle our gravest challenges. Thanks to our panel, like I said, I've been able to build those pictures in my mind to actually visualize how things might look out there. I was particularly struck by some of the comments that came out of our panel session just now. Richard started off by saying it's an exciting time. Yes, it's sad when targets are missed, and we've all felt that sadness, but it's also very exciting. And I keep going back to Daisy asking if you feel hope or if you've lost hope, and not to, because there are people working on it. There are people working on it. And I was particularly, I wasn't expecting a discussion about urban-rural relationships. That really sort of came out of nowhere today, but I found it very, very interesting indeed. That amazing fact that 70% of us could be living in cities by 2050. I mean, goodness me, that sort of blew my mind a bit and really hit home that Raoul is right. Cities are ecosystems. We are animals living in an ecosystem, and we need to treasure that and recognize it, but equally break down those divides between those that live more rurally and those that live in our urban towns and cities. And Richard and Heise, for me, just really laid that out brilliantly. And yes, think local, act global. No idea that came from 1870, but that's a new fun fact for me to tell my friends down the pub. Thank you very much, Richard. And diversity. I think, Jürgen was saying, diversity is the key part of that word, biodiversity. And it's in what we need to protect in our habitats, in our ecosystems, but it's also in us, in the groups that we bring together, the conversations that we have, the places we go, the people we talk to, and making that effort to seek that diversity and not live in our own cultural monocultures. and political monocultures, you know, try and get diversity into our thinking as well as into our environment. So a lot to take away and think about. I'd just like to thank all of our speakers today. Everyone has really made such an effort to make NetworkNature's event a success. So thank you for giving up your time to share your knowledge, your passion, your expertise. These are the people, you listening and watching are the people who are working to push nature-based solutions into the mainstream. And we're not there yet until everyone knows what NBS stands for and that it isn't an insurance company or a boy band. That's where we need to get to, but we are going to get there. People will recognize this and hold it alongside all of the other terminology that has become so common these days around net zero and climate change and so on. And it brings us back to the whole reason NetworkNature hosted this annual event today, to enable groups like this to come together on the same page where they can interact with each other, but also bring new people and new ideas into the narrative. And I really hope for those of you at home, you're not fallen asleep behind the webcam, that you're still engaged, you're still listening. Thank you for giving up a day of your time, because believe me, a full day on Zoom is tough. My eyes are feeling it, and so it will be a relief to switch off and absorb everything that we've learned. But thank you for giving your time. I hope it's been useful, whether you're an expert that talks about these issues every day or someone who's just dipping a toe in the water, that clean, unpolluted water we're all working towards. There will be, if you look at the chat, people will, the NetworkNature team will let you know how you can access a recording of today's event. It will be there for you to watch again. Have a great evening, everybody. Thank you so much, and good luck with everything that you're doing. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah,
thank you very much. Bye.
Well done, everybody. Thank you very much. Have a good evening.
And you, take care.
Take care. Bye, Jürgen. Bye, Richard.